Be careful with Santa. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria, and featuring Mad Chatter and Lucid Lupus. I have only the faintest memories of my former life. When I dream, I see what it used to be, who I used to be. I remember how I climbed into the sleigh, followed Santa, and finally confronted him. 3 of my fingers were taken, discarded, or ended up in one of the elves' vile stomachs. I heard the elves' demonic laughter as I became one of them. My body twisted into something unrecognizable, and even my soul was twisted. I remembered Santa's words about how my mother and I were adopted, so my pledge would not end up freeing my grandmother. It was all for nothing. It was the last feeling I had, and all I could remember. I wanted revenge. I wanted nothing but revenge. All before an endless feeling of confusion lingered over me. I never got my opportunity with Santa or any of the elves. Decades blurred into days. I changed into being completely unrecognizable, and the faces of those I once held dear were lost to me. I can no longer talk like I used to. I have even fewer abilities than the rest of my elf peers. With only my thumb and my pinky on one hand, I wasn't able to work as hard as the other elves. Every so often, I heard a chewing sound and the crunching of bones, but I couldn't recall the reason why. I'm physically weaker than the rest. Therefore, I'm shunned by the elves, exiled and forced to live in a broken down shack far away from the others. It's colder out here. Much, much colder. I get pushed away when food is delivered to us, the rotting remains of various and unspeakable animal parts. At first the smell made me sick, but since it is the only food available to us, I eat it now. I'm an outcast now. I was in my former life too, but nothing like this. I never expected that someday I would actually miss my life, and the people in it.
Get out of the way! Get back to work!
The elves push and curse me when I walk past them. Every Christmas I would creep as close as I could to Santa's house. A warm, richly decorated manor, and peer through the window at him. The home bordered on being too hot. The smell of beautifully cooked food filled my nostrils, and my stomach would growl from the memory. He was smiling, enjoying the meal with his family, and was a stark contrast to where I should have been.
Oh dear, I must get ready to prepare for tonight. Oh, there's so many things to do.
Santa mused, rubbed his hands together, and started to open a chest of drawers. After he went through his clothing and found the correct piece, he located the infamous sack of presents. Without the suit, he looked like any other tall, portly gentleman. If you ignored the points of his ears, his eyes like a cat, and the claw-like fingernails, he stood and walked towards the closet. His children. I couldn't remember their names. I reached down to find a piece of twisted, rusty wire I left by the window. I'm not sure why. I never knew I'd reach home. Looking back, I saw he lifted the suit, stained with so much blood I could smell the foul odor from here. It was his most prized possession, and the sight of it made my stomach turn. He, blessedly, went into the other room and came out changed into his costume. Every year when he came back it would be stained with even more blood, and sometimes gore.
Time to prepare the reindeer.
He cooed to himself, kissed his horde of children goodbye and came outside. I hid, stalked behind him and waited. He paused, stiffened, and turned to look directly at me. A look of sadness over his eyes as he leaned down, rested his hand on my head, and ruffled my hair, what was left of it.
Oh, it has been some time since I've seen you.
He leaned down to stare at my face more closely. I knew it changed from whatever it looked like before. Santa studied my face. I could see his bearded face, merely inches from mine. I wanted to lift the wire and stab it into his eye. I wouldn't live long, but at least I'd have my revenge. For whatever it was. I tried to say something to him, but all that came out was a garbled growl. The first time I'd spoken in a long time. If forever. I tried again, whimpered and kept going, but no words came out. No words could come out.
Oh dear. You lost your ability to speak.
He consoled, lifted my chin up casually under his clawed forefinger. I tried to say something to him, plead for help, and he gave my nose a good-natured tap. Santa looked down at the twisted wire in my hand. He lifted it, and I couldn't physically prevent him. I kept trying to pull my hand away. He opened it and shook his head, disappointed. He took the wire tool out of my hand, broke it, and tossed it behind him without looking. My makeshift weapon destroyed.
Oh no, my poor dear. My poor dear. You haven't adjusted well to your new life, have you?
He teased, a nearly gentle look on his weathered face. Here at the North Pole, at his home, it was harder for him to hide what he truly was. I couldn't tell what he was or what he tried to be.
How about you come with me and help me on my travels? It will stop the other elves from picking on you.
Santa offered. He wasn't wrong. If I thought Santa was cruel, the majority of his elves were malicious to the core. It would give me an opportunity to see the world I only saw glimpses of when I was dreaming. I nodded, grunted in answer, and together we walked towards the reindeer. He put on gloves to conceal his hands, tucked his pointed ears under the Santa hat and blinked. His cat eyes now replaced with friendly human eyes. If I did not know, I would have believed the illusion. Each reindeer was harnessed and ready to go. There were times when they were the docile creatures people imagined them to be. Yet like everything else here, anything wholesome had a gruesome aspect to it. Nothing was ever as it seemed. I got in their sleigh and it felt oddly familiar.
Up, my darlings!
Santa cooed at the reindeer to get them up into the air. I swayed silently. The first time I left the North Pole, and my head was gripped with a sharp pain. I rested my twisted, broken hand on my forehead. Beside me, Santa's hands were on the reins, guiding the reindeer towards wherever they needed to go. I gazed around the sky and felt the wind on my face. It felt different this time. The heavy feeling of the North Pole was lifted. My lungs opened up and I felt better. Without looking at me, Santa began.
You know, well, I suppose you don't. There are times I have regretting the deal that we made. It was terribly brave and noble of you to try and save your family.
He continued, a frown on his wise face.
There are many reasons why people became my elves. You've got quite the, how do you say it? Short straw? No. Bad end of the deal? Oh, gods above, below, and within. I can't remember.
While Santa murmured to himself, he scratched his head and thought.
You were supposed to be in service for, what, 100? 300? Oh, I can't remember. Time flies for me. I suppose you don't remember either,
200? It sounded so familiar. Why was that number so prominent in my mind? There were houses of a similar size and shape, with a backyard for the reindeer to land. They looked so alike yet so different, with each home having their own items. A way for each family to demonstrate their individuality. There were floating devices that beeped and made sounds, tending to the plants outside. And there were bright lights with words in the sky. Floating devices carried boxes, dropped them inside. And there were no people in the streets. Everything looked so familiar yet so alien to me. I couldn't answer Santa. We stopped by the first house on Santa's long journey. The reindeer pranced in the snow before finally settling down. He tied the reins, lifted the sack of presents, and beckoned for me to tag along behind him. I followed. I thought he would go down the chimney. However, the home didn't have one. Santa held up an open palm. He blew and whispered words under his breath. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he turn into mist to travel through the tiny keyhole? Perhaps there was a secret way to open the door. I let out a slow, questioning sound. He must have suspected something. The lock opened and the door creaked open. Santa turned, winked at me, and gestured with an open hand for me to enter.
Shall we?
Together we walked inside the home. The home was filled with expensive items, but the light inside was dim, and it took me a little while to realize that I could see in the dark. I could smell something, sweet and delicious. Before I could speak, Santa had already found the delicious treats left for him as an offering, and clapped to himself.
Oh, I love when they remember to leave something for me.
He mused to himself, finished everything, and used his fingertip to lift every single crumb, wasting absolutely nothing. My stomach growled violently, and now he remembered I was there.
Oh, my mistake.
He chuckled, with a wicked edge to his voice. His gloved hand lifted one of the cookies, crushed it in his hand, and let the crumbs drop to the floor. I stared at him, lowered my body down, and picked up the crumbs. I smelled them, coughed, and rubbed my nose frantically. I remembered what they were, but this?
Oh, my mistake. Oh dear. It seems you have been an elf for far too long. You don't remember all the treats and goodies.
I was busy coughing up my lungs when I smelled something different. In the corner of the room there were two bowls, one with water and one with offcuts of meat. There were names on both the bowls. I stepped closer, sniffed the air, and the realization sank in. It was dog food. The more I remembered, the more I knew how insulting my existence was. I heard Santa talking in the background to someone, an exhausted woman trying to keep up with both the normal expenses and with the expensive gifts around Christmas time. No doubt another victim to be blessed or cursed, depending on if they complied with the deal Santa made.
Of course. I can help you get better presents for your children next year. Oh, I know. I know sometimes parents just can't afford things. Will you agree?
I ignored the chatter behind me, unable to look the parent in the eyes, worried that they would see the warning in them. I looked into the bowl of water and saw my reflection for the first time. My face was twisted, a thick skin growth around my throat. My teeth had twisted years ago into horrid fangs, no doubt making it difficult for me to speak. I remembered my face from before, my life from before. And I remembered everything that had been done to me. Behind me, I heard shuffling. I turned back around and saw the woman creeping behind me, a knife ready to strike in her hand, desperation and tears in her eyes. I saw Santa in the background. He held a tiny dog while he tenderly stroked its fluffy head.
Don't mind me. You see, presents are getting awfully expensive. So, if Diana here kills you, I will be footing the bill for presents for her children. If you win, I guess we will deal with it later.
She was murmuring apologies under her breath. I could see my reflection in her eyes. Nothing about myself resembled what I remembered, and I had to take my revenge. She used her knife to cut at the air, missing me, and I reached for a nearby kitchen knife. We circled each other, getting close occasionally, and pulling away only to avoid each other's blade.
Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. Food and a show.
I heard Santa call out. Out of the corner of my eye I could see him sitting down, enjoying himself and still stroking the tiny dog. No doubt his latest adoption. I couldn't focus on what he was doing. She pushed me against the sink, my malnourished frame unable to hold her off, and the knife was soon at my throat. The thickened skin prevented the knife from slicing through. It hurt and I let out a screaming growl, the knife in my good hand. I stabbed her hard and fast in the side, aiming for her kidney, while my two-fingered hand repeatedly struck her in the face. I remember the heat from the wet blood. It clung to me, and at first, I couldn't tell whether it was hers or mine. It was only when she fell awkwardly onto the floor I realized I had won. My hands trembled and I felt shame. Santa, however, let out a round of applause celebrating my victory, a bright smile on his face. You nearly could have missed the sight of fangs and he stood up.
Oh, that was wonderful. Absolutely marvelous. Such a fine show, and look, we have made a friend,
he said, the small terrier still in his arms. The tricolored dog wagged its tail, completely oblivious to the carnage, and Santa scratched under its fuzzy chin. I was still gasping for breath. I was still gasping with a knife in my hand, my forearm coated in blood. I watched him. I could see better now. I could see him better now.
I think I've been unkind to you,
he said, returned back to the loving grandpa persona.
Your time of service is at an end. Your family are, well, they won't recognize you now that it has been so long.
I felt the change and looked back at my hands. They were human once more. I smiled and tried to speak, but only a rasping sound came out. It had been so long since I had done so. I smiled, happy, and deep down I knew it wouldn't last forever. I still had all my old wounds. My bones cracked, unable to support my weight. My body ached and my muscles cramped up. My hand lifted to my neck. The slash that hadn't impacted my elf body made a mess of my human one. Santa stepped forward, held me, and I was nearly comforted in his arms.
Shh. It's all right, my dear. I'm sorry. I can't remember your name.
He murmured softly. A fingertip gently caressed my hair. I felt faint, and I knew I would finally be free of Santa. Of the memories. Everything. I coughed a little and Santa looked down at me. Tenderly. Kindly. I couldn't let him off what he did to my family. Hell, to all of those other families. With the last bit of my strength, I lifted the knife in my hand and stabbed it into his eye. He cried out loudly. A demonic roar filled the room and together we both fell. Our blood mixed and unified. The tiny dog wagged its tail softly. He lowered his head and lapped at the blood pooling on the floor. I hope you enjoy this story. Make sure you check back next year for the next part of the story. If you haven't listened to it yet, check out the earlier episodes, along with this handy Christmas playlist to get into the festive season. I'd like to thank Mad Chatter, or Dimensional Drift ASMR, and Lucid Lupus for joining me here again today. Please make sure you check out their channels. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, comment, and don't forget to stab the like button. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreons, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.